Memories compete for recognition as we view together some of the familiar scenes of our native place. The winning of the Tidy Towns Award in 1980 marked a watershed of sorts between the old and the new way of looking at our wonderful environment. From then on, the wish and the will to enhance it was translated into action, as exemplified in this beautiful piece of wood sculpture. Here at our school, the blending of the old and the new is reflected in the ancient grave slab of Martin the monk, merging with the profuse shrubberies and the beautiful specimens of white beam, beech and cherry, not forgetting the whispering poplars that adorn the grounds. As we move to the Garden of Reflection in Ballariva, where echoes of stone cutters and stone breakers seep through the peace and quiet, we meet a wood sculpture on the way that relays its own message, a message that reflects the respect the local community has for the innate beauty of wood and stone. The site of the old Tom Ash Hall, now in serene retirement, brings back 1,000 memories of dances, plays, concerts, travelling shows and meetings from years long gone by. The way that itself and the post office are maintained is a tribute to those responsible. The stile over the wall into the priest's field begs many questions. This stile was the beginning and the end of many a journey in the past, as people used the short cuts across the fields to shop and church and pub. What an enhancement to the village is the fountain that stirs more chords in the human heart, as its water gurgles down the sides of this huge rock, resurrected itself from the bowels of the earth in another part of the parish. The Garda station brings back memories of the time when at least 3 guards and a sergeant were employed in policing our peaceful community. As the church tower comes into view, one thinks of the people, our people, who put it there in pre-famine times and the wonderful faith they had. An example surely to those of us living in easier times that respect for the church and what it stands for will never go astray. The road through the village stirs up more memories. Memories perhaps of fair days in the past when farmers brought their livestock here and sold them to the highest bidder, and where the deal was often sealed over a drink in the pub that now is known as Foxy Fallon's. The Heritage Centre reminds us again of a past that is gone, with its harrows and rakes and other implements that have become redundant in this modern age of John Deere and huge machinery. We call to mind as well the people we knew who harrowed and ploughed and rolled and reaped in the little fields that once exuded so much laughter and chat in the midst of all the labour. At the end of the day they could retire happy, as they and their neighbours admired the fruits of their work. The straight drills, the well-headed cocks of hay, and the neat rows of corn stooks that decorated many autumn fields. The village pump at the bottom of the hill lies quietly in its setting, as it remembers in silence, while the 5 birds on the rock at Cornadoe Crossroads wait patiently for those travelling up the Clogher Road. The prize-winning plaque of 2000 is another sign of the community's continued commitment to a greener and tidier environment. If one were looking for a place to reflect and pray, one could go to the church. Alternatively, one could come here to this beautiful Quarry retreat, where peace and stillness is reflected off the face of the quarry itself, and also from every shrub and flower that grows and blooms in its many crevices and corners. This most beautiful enclave so enhanced by creative hands and minds over the past 10 years, is such a refreshing place to visit for native and stranger alike. Enough just to stand and absorb the atmosphere, the varying themes of stone and water and wild nature at its best. The pool with its tadpoles, the reflections in the water, enough to stir the imagination. Which of us is not affected emotionally and spiritually by coming here to this secret and sacred place to ponder on its many facets? A sacred place indeed, sacred first of all in the age of its rock, but sacred also in the labour of the people who down the centuries have come here to hew from its rough face the raw material from which they have shaped the stones to build their homes and churches. Also cut out in the shadow of this quarry face were the many beautiful headstones erected in Saints Island and Cashel in memory of the dead who rest in peace in those hallowed cemeteries. And the stone man with his sledge held aloft is truly a fitting memorial to the many men who laboured in this same quarry in a past that now is just a memory. Derry Dara, the oak wood, beautiful in itself. And Lady Well and the Mass Rock, where once our ancestors came and prayed and worshipped their God in secret and in hiding. A beautiful place it was then, a beautiful place it still is, as we can't help but notice while we watch together those images from Derry Dara and Culnagore. The oaks and the woodcock from which those two lovely place names have been derived are still very much part of the environment here, while the swans and other wildfowl add their own colour and variety to this wonderful local amenity. Hard to imagine that the natural amenities of lake and woodland, with reeds growing, swans flying, and cattle grazing, were as real to the people then as they are to us today. This woodland path adds its own charm and spur to the imagination. If I were young again, how I would enjoy going down it with my friends and discovering at least some of the 1,000 secrets of its flora and fauna. One could expect to encounter a rabbit at least, or maybe a fox or a hare, on a peaceful stroll through this lovely woodland. Saints Island, the very name is an indicator in itself of the sanctity of this revered location. The images of its ruined buildings are a strong reminder also of what our people suffered in times of persecution. Persecution there certainly was, but before that there was the golden era when its monastery was famous for its work and for its writings. It was to here Michael O'Clery came in the early 17th century to collect material for his great work, now known as the Annals of the Four Masters. The ruined monastery buildings still contain some fine examples of Romanesque windows that in themselves are a tribute to the skills of those medieval stone cutters and builders. There are also some fine monuments in stone to the dead of more recent times, a sign that the art of stone cutting survived well into the 20th century. It was from here in Porture that Oliver Boy Fitzgerald set out with 80 men in the time of Cromwell to assist Sir James Dillon in his pursuit of the Cromwellian soldiers from Ballinacliffey Castle, who had ransacked the poor Clare convent in Bethlehem and scattered the nuns in all directions. They found temporary refuge on some of the islands on Lough Ree, but they never returned to Bethlehem. The remains of the wall and turret are reminders of the power that once emanated from this place. Pelham Main built Porture Lodge. It was begun in about 1855 and built in 2 stages. The back part first, and then about 1880 was added the front part and the lovely boathouse in cut stone. For years the younger members of the family spent all their summer holidays at Porture, where they learned a lot of country lore about eel fishing and shooting from the O'Haras and Handleys of the Black Islands. One can imagine what good times they had in boating to and from the islands. In this lovely lakeside setting, the islanders and the visitors enjoyed each other's company and formed relationships that lasted down through the generations. One doesn't associate a dog with having thoughts, but this one seems to have many, as he trots happily along the lane in the footsteps of his master. When he reaches the rocks, he seems to be undecided as to what to do next, or maybe he is just admiring the beauty of the place in his own doggy way. The autumn foliage adds its own colour, while the lovely grove of trees has to be admired. It fits so comfortably into its environment and seems to be very proud to be where it is and as it is. As we pause at the old school in Claron, we think of the days that Leo spent there, and especially of the day he wrote A Trip to Connaught for his friend James Costello. What would have been Leo's relationship with John Boswell, we wonder, as we look at Ballyorney House, where Boswell once lived. More memories surface as Cashel Cemetery comes into view, where rest the remains of many of our friends and ancestors. The old Church of Ireland School is another reminder of days gone by, situated as it is beside an old cave, which in reality is an old souterrain, probably used in ancient times as a storage area or as a place of refuge from the enemy. As we move to the old quarry in Cashel, from which stones were quarried and transported by boat to Athlone for building purposes, we are moved yet again by the beauty of the lake as we look outwards from the land. Lough Ree is a storied lake having many tales to tell. In early Christian times, saints and scholars seeking peace and quiet inhabited its islands. Later this peace was to be spoiled by marauding hordes of thieves and vandals. We are lucky to be living in a more peaceful era, when its waters can be enjoyed by all those who wish. The remains of Elfeet Castle again sparks off many as yet unanswered questions, as do the remains of a castle in Dernagas, which is now known locally as the Ball Alley. Generations of people have passed under their shadows while their stories remain hidden in the mists of time. If stones could talk, they would have many a story to tell, and wouldn't we all love to find out more about each of them? There is no silence like the silence of a bog, some poet once said. But in this case, that silence has been interrupted on a number of occasions as the turf was machined, reared and harvested to provide fuel for the winter's fires. The bogland has a unique quality and beauty, but in this fast-moving age, most of us don't have time to absorb it. Barley Harbour, with its pier, which was built in the fairly recent past, facilitates many leisure activities like swimming, boating, fishing and shooting. Many come here as well just to pass the time while absorbing the beauty of the place. It is a quiet haven for many passers-by who often call in to relax in its tranquil setting, far from the madding crowds of towns and cities. Watching the swans grazing is a most rewarding and relaxing pastime. Their majestic grace has intrigued people of all times and cultures. Their association with water meant that swans were sacred to many pagan peoples, including the Celts. We all remember the beautiful legend of the children of Lough Ree. What a pleasure it is to stroll down a country road like this, many of which are to be found all over the parish. Many indeed just leading down to the lake shore. This one, of course, has more interesting possibilities, and one of the great attractions roads like this have is our fascination with what may lie round the next bend or over the next little hill. The development of the Derrahon houses in the 1950s predated the Celtic Tiger boom that we are presently experiencing. This compact and civic-spirited community, in its own unique way, gives the stranger and the visitor a warm welcome and a pleasant introduction to our parish. The Mass Rock in the same townland is from another era which has left its own indelible mark on all of us. This emotional and spiritual trip through old familiar scenes and places is appropriately reflected, we hope, by the two contrasting faces of Lough Ree now being depicted. The wild ferocity of the wind-driven waves splashing over the rocks and pier, symbolising perhaps some of our own turbulent life experiences as we tussled with the ups and downs of life down the years. More peaceful and tranquil times await us, we hope, as we look forward to the calmer waters of a serene sunset.